All right. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Peah. We are starting the 7th chapter, right? Kol Zayis, beginning with Halacha Aleph. We're going to be learning today. We're starting all the way on the top. The topic of this Pedic will be about Shikha by Ilonois. And as the Mishnah will point out, the big rule of this Mishnah, that if you have a tree that is distinctive in some way, which means that even if one were to forget a tree, because of the unique distinctiveness of the tree, there's a high probability that you will remember, I forgot that tree. That tree indeed will not be subject to shikha altogether. That will be the big rule of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is going to give various examples of the meaning of having something distinctive. The Gemara is going to give the reason behind it. We're going to learn, God willing, both the Marafulda's understanding of Rabbi Ilah in the Gemara and the Rashidilio's understanding in the Gemara, that if you go into details are different. And we're going to have today, through this discussion, a very interesting source from the Sugya that is really a greater topic, and that is when you have kamos versus echos. Kamos meaning quantity, echos meaning quality. We all understand that quality is greater than quantity, but there is at some point ribui kamos. If you have a very large amount of quantity, that, according to some opinions, could be machriya, that can overpower, that can overweigh, that can outdo even something that has a greater amount of quality. Ribui kamos is machriya echos, is really a shas sugya. The one who introduces this topic in great length is the Lekach Toiv, and our daf here will be one of the pointers from where we'll see this concept. We're going to have in the Gemara, certain statements, certain inquiries that will further clarify the type of distinctiveness that's needed to make that tree memorialable enough for it not to be subject to shikha. And finally, we're going to have at the end of the Mishnah, and subsequently in the Gemara, the Shita of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says the words, Ein shikha l'zeisim. There is never shikha by olive trees. And we're going to have a machloikis in the Gemara how to understand Shitas Rabbi Yossi. This is more or less the first daf of the 7th chapter, daf Nun Ches. Without any further ado, Chavre, let's dive right inside the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah like this: Kol zayish yesh lo shem basada. Any olive tree that has a shame, that has a name meaning that it's distinctive, that it's extraordinary, that it's unique. Afilu kizayis hanotoifa. Remember this word. Bishatoi. Even if what makes this tree distinctive is that it's known as the tree that drips oil. What do we mean by dripping oil? That without you even needing to squeeze the grapes during the season, not the whole time, but at least during the season, not grapes. The olives are saturated with oil, that they produce oil, so to say, on their own. It's special. It's very abundant. That's why it has a name. This type of great picture, this type of dripping oil, as we'll see more details, doesn't need to happen the whole year, but it happens during certain seasons. During the season of when the olives are full, and if such a tree ushachache was forgotten, the din is eino shikha. It's not subject to shikha. It retains and remains in the ownership of the owner. Now, what is very important, this zayis hanotoifa will also be discussed, God willing, tomorrow on Daf Nun Tes. Tomorrow, we're going to learn about someone who began to harvest that tree, and then for whatever reason got distracted, forgot that they didn't finish, and they moved on to the next tree. In such a case, have to remember that remaining tree is subject to shikha. Our Mishnah is dafke, speaking about a scenario where the person, the owner, the farmer, the worker, completely forgot that tree. And let me already speak out, as we'll see in the beginning of the Gemara. We're going to get into nuances, but shikha means that you forgot something, and there's a high likelihood you will never remember it. Let's use these words. But if something is so special or special enough that even if you currently forgot it, mistama, you will remember it on your own, that is what the Mishnah is saying. That is not subject to shikha altogether. Now, when do we say that if you have a tree that is distinctive, that is unique? In this case, it has a certain special quality that when the olives are ripe, they begin to expel oil on their own. Wow, so people really want those olives. If you completely forget the tree, you'll remember, I forgot the tree, you'll go back to it, which is the case of our Mishnah. But when a farmer begins to harvest the tree, and if for whatever reason they got distracted, since they already began to harvest it, it's likely they'll never remember to go back to it because they will think that they completely harvested it already. Okay. Now, what type of shame is needed? It's what type of distinctiveness will put this tree into the exclusion from shekha. If it's distinctive, either bishmai, because of its unique name, or because of maisav. Maisav would means that which the tree produces, or because of its location, which is really a topic that we had above, as we'll repeat again over here. In other words, either there's a distinctive name, or because it's unusually productive, or because it's a tree that's identified by its location. Now, the Mishnah will go through every one of these three. What's the bishmai? For example, shahaya shafchani, or it is baishani. Now, shafchani says the Pnei Moshe that it produces a lot of oil. Baishani says the Pnei Moshe, even though we'll see everyone, the Gemara will speak a lot about, it ashames the other trees. The challenge that we will have, that's bishmai. Now, l'chu'ura, shafchani, that there's so much oil pouring out of it. Is this not zayis hanotoifa? Is this the first case of the Mishnah? We'll see in the Gemara. Next, b'maisav. B'maisav means shu oisa harbe. It produces a lot. Now, what's the difference between maisav and shumai? Pasha doesn't make sense, right? Shumai means it's a shafchani. There's a lot of oil. So what's b'maisav? It produces a lot. So, guys, the Gemara is going to go through every single one, show you how indeed it's different categories. But continuing with the Pnei Moshe, Shu Oisa Harba means it's not about a lot of olive oil, which is the shafchani, a lot of olive oil, or so much oil that it ashames its neighboring trees. But Maisav means it produces a lot of zaysim. It produces a lot of olives. And again, this will be, as we already said in the introduction, there's kamus and there's echos. Okay, so many olives means the olives are not special, but there are many olives, a lot of kamus. There comes a certain point when the riboy kamus is of great significance. Actually, according to some opinions, it's machriya echus, and the Shmai is speaking about the quality of the olives themselves, that they have a tremendous amount of oil. What we still have to clarify, and we'll get there in the Gemara, is how is shafchani not zayis hanotoifa? But we'll see. And maybe it is. That's the name of the olive tree, Zayis Hanotoif. Now, b'mekoymai that we had before. The mekoymai means there is nothing unique about the tree in itself, but its location makes it distinctive because it's near either a gas or a pirza. In other words, it's near a particular landmark. Now, does that help? Was that not a machlokes beishamai and beisilo, if you remember, which it is? And wasn't it only Beishamai that says that if it's near a gas and a pirza, it's not subject to shikha? We were learning that regarding oimarim, but we're not learning it regarding a tree. And as we already know, we really do not want to make a stam mishnah kashitas Beishamai. The Gemara will address it. Okay, but at least we get the gist. It has to be distinctive. And therefore the Mishnah concludes, Baruch Sha'ar Kol HaSeisim, regarding all of the other olives, you have the normal rules. Of course, it's subject to shikha. Meaning, if you forgot one, let's learn entire tree, or two entire trees, then it's subject to the law of shikha. And like everything else we learned above, shloisha. If you forgot three entire trees, like we had before by the shurais, by both by the kama, right, by the grain, and by the omer, then einon shikha. Okay. Says the Mishnah, and actually, let me just introduce now something that will come, God willing, to by the end of the shir. Where do we have in the Torah shikha concerning trees? Go find that. On one hand, you can argue that we already began in the beginning of the Masechta that leket shikha and peah are juxtaposed one to the other, And since we clearly had psukim that we kept on quoting, right, about a pasuk in Kedoshim, just Bahashgacha Pratis, happens to be the Parsha Sashavua. It's so exciting when you learn for many weeks together a sugya based on a pasuk, and you read the pasuk in the Torah, it has so much more, I don't know, you feel close to it. We're living with it. But the Torah, Ketzira is about grains. Ketzira is not about harvesting a tree. Now, we do have a pasuk in Parshas Kisei. I'll read it out right now, and we're going to get back to it at the end of today's year. The Torah says, Kisach boid zeischa, when you beat your olive tree, which is the way you would harvest it, Loi sefair acharech, literally means you shall not remove its glory behind you. It's for those of us who remember the chitas that we learn, Rashi teaches, if you open up a Chumash Rashi in Kisei, Loi sefair, don't remove its glory, implies you have to leave payah. In other words, don't fully harvest it. The glory of a tree is its fruits. Fully harvesting a tree would be removing its glory. When the Torah says, don't remove its glory, it means to leave payah. But for that, the Torah could have only said, don't remove its glory. Acharecha, behind you, Rashi says, Rashi in Chumash Shikha. Acharecha means if the tree is behind you, not all of the glory. If you skip the tree now is behind you, don't go back to get it. And indeed, that it has to be developed a bit more, as we'll see today in the Gemara. Then you'll appreciate Chumash Rashi. Because actually, as I'll speak it out already, the word acharecha in this pasuk doesn't necessarily in itself go to shikha, as we'll explain. But we have a gzeira shava, acharecha, from a vine. We'll get there. And therefore, yes, ultimately, we interpret the acharecha in the pasuk that we quoted as in reference to shikha, like Rashi says in Chumash. However, Rabbi Yossi Omer, and I'm giving you a heads up already, that there is a machlokes in the Gemara how to understand this Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi says, Ein shikha l'zeis, that there isn't shikha for olive trees. The one way of understanding it, as the Amoira Rabbi Yossi Bar Zavda explains Rabbi Yossi, he doesn't make the Gzeira Shava acharecha. He doesn't interpret the acharecha by Zaysan to be referring to shikha. There's no shikha b'chal by olive trees, which would, by the way, mean there's no shikha by trees, period. There's no din of shikha by trees. However, other Amoiraim understand B'shitas Rabbi Yossi that he agrees that there is shikha by trees. He interprets acharecha in the pasuk that we quoted to him referring to shikha. However, there was a certain period of time, particularly Bisman of the Tana Rabbi Yossi. Now, the Mishnayos, they were written approximately 200 years, 180 years after Churban Abayis. Let's remember that around 65 years after the Churban came along a Jew by the name of Bar Kokhba, and he declared himself to be Mashiach. And he made this big revolt against the Romans, and he was successful to a certain degree. He wasn't all the way successful, but at the end, when the Romans managed to win against Bar Kokhba, right? You know, the whole Hatoiva HaMeitiv was instituted because of it. It was what happened in Beitar. Maybe more Jews were killed then by the Churban Abayis. And one of the things that Hadrianus Harasha did when he won over Bar Kokhba is not only that he killed all the Jews, tremendous millions, he destroyed the land of Israel, including he cut down all of the trees. And there was a period of time that there were very few olive trees. So that's one of the. So Rabbi Yossi is saying every olive tree is distinctive. Perhaps Rabbi Yossi holds there is the din of shikha by trees, but he says just like the Mishnah is saying that if there is a zayis that has a shame basada, right? The three things shmoi, masa, mekoyim makes it distinctive. And if something is very distinctive, as we'll see in more details in the Gemara, it's not subject to shikha. During the time of the Tana Rabbi Yossi, so for the next, let's say, 100 years or 200 years, until the land of Israel was properly repopulated with olive trees, every olive tree was distinctive, was unique. No one would forget an olive tree. And therefore, ein shikha l'zeisim. You got it? So it's either only for a certain period of time, or again, we'll learn this in the Gemara, or Rabbi Yossi B'chlal disagrees with the interpretation of the pasuk and Kiseitze, and according to the Tana Rabbi Yossi, there is no shikha by trees, period. Why does he speak about zeisim? Because the pasuk that the Tanakama finds a source for shikha by trees happens to be by zeisim. The pasuk that we quoted, Kisach by zeisim. Okay. So let's begin. Why? So what that the tree is distinctive? Who cares? Says the Gemara, Omar Rabullah, we had this many times, and again, we are suggesting that as the Yerushalmi is mekatzer, that it's really Rabbi Ila'a that we are familiar with. So we take out the ayin, we take out the hey, the ayin in the beginning, the hey at the end. Or his name was Rabullah. Rabbi Lau, Omar Rabullah, Ksiv. And here we're going back to the pasuk in Kiseitze, speaking about Omer, where it says, and if you want to look at the entire pasuk again, just look inside the Torah Oyer Shalom. Kisikzor ktsircha bisodecha v'shachachto Omer basoder loy sashu lekachtoi loy sashu. We can stop with that, etc., etc. So says Rabbi Elam Omer she'ato shoykchay la'olam. And the pasuk is speaking about sheaves, right? Speaking about the standing grain and about sheaves, something that once you forgot, once you overlooked, the possibility of you remembering it is very little. You forgot it, you forgot it. That is where the Torah is saying, since you forgot it, so to say, for good, don't go back to get it. And that excludes a distinctive olive tree, in extension, a distinctive tree, that you will remember it because it has something distinctive. Ubemela, it's not included in the whole din of shikha. And here we have a beautiful, nuanced machloikis. Let's read both shitas because we have a relatively short daf in the Marafulda that will go to first, and then in the Rashirilio that will go to second. So the Marafulda is 7 lines from the top of the. Second line from the top of the Amid. Beginning of the Gemara. Amid Abla. Hamishna Seinu, because Bala Farish Minakra. It comes all from the way we expound the verse. The stam shikha mashma, the word shikha. The word shikha means you forgot it. Sha'ato sheichoi lo'olam. You forgot it. Yatza zayis hanatoifa, which is the first example the Mishnah gave, the dripping olive. Afagav sha'ato sheichoi achshav, even if you happen to forget it now, because of its distinctiveness, because of its abundance, ato zoichoi la'acher zman. You will remember it. Shahadehu mesuyim b'shmoi ubamasav or. Either or. And that's why it's not equal. In other words, that Rabbi Law is teaching the word shikha. Shikha means you forgot it for good, and not something that even if you forget it, you'll remember it. In other words, a yid never forgets the Eibishter. Even if, God forbid, on some very external level, temporarily they forgot, they'll remember. That is, in other words, it's pashat shikha. Shikha means forgetting, not forgetting and then remembering. Look inside the Rashirilio. It's in the middle of the right column. It's in the beginning of the Gemara. He has a much more different and detailed interpretation. And for that, you need a pasuk. Because according to Rabbi Lo, why do you have to bring the whole pasuk? Shikha means to forget. Says that Rashirilio, the even the Einoich Chayzel Lakacha so Omer. Since once you forgot it, you will only go back. Why would you go back to take it? God says, don't go back to take it. Why would you go back to take it? Kavan. If you forgot it, why does the Torah say don't go back to take it. You forgot it. You won't go back to take it. You know why you'll go back to take it? Because you remembered. Because you remembered. Oh, it's when you remember, the Torah says, don't go back to take it. So now the Rashi says that Rabbi Law has a question. Why wouldn't the Torah write, Ki siktzoi ketzircha b'sodecha, v'zacharta oimer shachuach, and you remembered something that you forgot, don't go back to take it. That is what the pasuk should have said. In other words, he's not interpreting the word shikha. Shikha might mean something temporarily. Temporary insanity, temporary forgetting. No, the Torah shouldn't have said that it's incomplete, the pasuk. It should have said that that's Gaval. And now, since the Torah doesn't write that, is Ashmo Inan, the Lishkach Milsa Gereya the Eineroi Lezerche. The Torah doesn't write it that way to emphasize that what are we talking about? Something that you will not remember. What is it that you don't remember? Something that's insignificant, that's relatively insignificant, which is an average. Average, you'll forget. Something that you will remember, the Torah allows you to take it back. Gavaldik. Big difference.
Is this the first time we said you forgot forever? Or what? Isn't it the first time we said that if you forgot forever? Or do we say that before? I don't remember here.
In other words, the Marafulda is the one that's interpreting shikha that way. The Rashi is Gavaldik. You say, no, from the word shikha, you can go either way. Either the meaning of the word shikha, or the fact that the Torah words something that's incomplete. The Torah should have said that if you forgot an omer, and then v'zacharto omer shachuach, if you remember something forgotten, don't go and get it. The Torah should have said that. We're skipping a step. V'zacharto omer shachuach. The Torah says you forget something, don't go back to take it. If you forgot to take it, if you forgot it, why would you go back to take it? Because you remember, the Torah should have written that. The fact that Torah doesn't write it, that is what's teaching you that something that you forgot that you will remember is not even, we're not talking about that. We're talking about something that you forgot that you probably will never remember. That is where the Torah is speaking about the whole mitzvah of leaving. Okay, let's go. Now,
I think in general, it's more like remember the thing you will always remember is not just it's with the general concept. Three bundles. Those three bundles. Or with a big,
I know.
Bundle.
Saw.
Don't forget it's a bundle. You're gonna come back.
Very good. Right. Very good. Very good. Okay, very good. But we have a good source. Okay. There was a lot. I just thought Danny mentioned something. Now I don't want to get the trip with time. We learned the Mishnah the way that Rambam learns it, that we're speaking about forgetting the whole olive tree. Forgetting the whole olive tree. And the reason why the Ravid argues with the Rambam is because of what Danny mentioned, because many understand that this is not unique for an olive tree. It's very much connected to the din of Tusa. And if that would be the case, then you have to push it understand how olive trees work. How many saw do you harvest from an olive tree, and why didn't the Mishnah give the shear of Tusa? Why don't we have those shiurim over here? Okay, let's go back. Rabbi Yirmiyah Boyi, this is not the first time we had this, I think, on Daf Aleph and Masechta Brachos, or on Daf Beis, that when we learned the word Boye, many times, not always, in the Yerushalmi, unlike in the Bavli, Boye means there's an inquiry, a two-sided question, not a kash, a Boye, two options. Here, Boye means a statement. It's not a question. Rabbi Yirmiyah Boye, what happens if something is distinctive, but it's subjective to its owner? There is begashmius, nothing special about the tree. Has this average olives. The olives give average oil. You find it distinctive. For a mishagas, is something, let's say, sentimental value. Is it included in the Mishnah? Yes. Yes, it will not be subject to shikha. Kimishu mesuyam doesn't have to be something objective. It may be something subjective. And why does the Gemara put Rabbi Yirmiyah after Rabbi Law? Because now that you know the source, which is what Rabbi Law taught us, Rabbi Yirmiyah's statement, it's not a boye, it's not a question, it's a statement, makes sense. Something that's special for you, you won't forget forever. I don't care that if you were to argue, why is it special to you? Who cares? The Aniyim are not supposed to know it. Like we keep on mentioning many times already, that the Aniyim was not Hefkerveld. There were certain times a day, like we had by pay. I know we spoke about a pay, that the owner had to be present, and he opened up the field, and he supervised the Aniyim, so he'll tell the Aniyim, this is not Shekha. Okay, next statement, not a boy. If you have, again, an ordinary tree that's standing next to a date palm, Hadekel Misaimoi. The fact that it's near a date palm, that will make the olive tree distinctive. In other words, the Mishnah gave two examples of location, gas, and pirza. The chiddush of Rabbi Yirmiyah is it doesn't have to be a gas, doesn't have to be a pirza. It can be next to another type of tree. Now, another statement. What happens if two trees are not toifas, two trees juxtaposed one next to the other? Both of them have olives that have such an abundance of oil. Each one reminds the other. When you learn this Gemara, you should jump with Akasha. Who needs to have two trees next to each other? The Mishnah just said that even one tree that's not toifa, special, has a lot of oil, you're not going to forget for good. Why do you need to have one next to the other? So the Mara Fulda explains, based on what we spoke out when we learned the Mishnah, in contrast to what we'll learn tomorrow, our Mishnah, like the Rambam, we just quoted the Rambam again, is speaking about you forgot an entire tree. What happens if you began to harvest in a toifa tree? And then you got distracted and you forgot. There, the remaining olives on the tree is shikha. Because you will not remember. When your memory will go back, you're going to say, no, I harvested that tree because you began to harvest it. So on that says the third ruling of Rabbi Yirmiyah, that even if you only harvested a little bit of the tree and you forgot the remaining, and therefore by one tree, it will be subject to shekha. If two trees, one near the other, you began to harvest both, and you forgot the remainder of both. The fact that it was two, now it's also not subject to shekha. Atkan boyi the rotza loimar, which is the words of the Marafulda, the statement. Now let's go to the inquiry. The entire tree is dripping, every single one. I mean, it's distinctive compared to other fields, but one tree is not more distinct than the other. And you forgot an entire tree. What will be the din? Maybe you're not going to forget. Maybe you will forget because that's the whole tree. So says the Gemara, I will know the answer to this from one of the ways of understanding the Tana Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi, at the end of the Mishnah, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yakum, as we already spoke out, this is one understanding in the Tana Rabbi Yossi, that the reason why Rabbi Yossi says there's no shikha to zeisim, he agrees that there is shikha by zeisim. It was during his era, because of the churban that Hadrianus did after the revolt of Bar Kokhba, that he uprooted almost all the olive trees. That because there was very, very few olive trees. And therefore all of the trees were special. That's how some understand Beshitas Rabbi Yossi the Tana. Now hold on a second. Let's go with this understanding. The Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi are arguing, which means, this is beautiful, that the Tanakama holds that even after the Churban of Adrianus, of Hadrian, when every tree was special, Adrian, even then, if not for one olive tree to be distinctive, there will be shekha. All of the trees are special. Is Araya, when all of the trees are special, but not this tree special, if you forget this tree, you will forget it for good. And it's included in shekha. Gavaldi. And similarly, if all of the trees in this field is not toifa, according to the Tanakama, if you forget one tree, it won't be subject to shekha. It's not unique compared to the field. And Rabbi Yossi will hold, no, it's that the boya really is the machlokes between the Tanakama, which is the Chachamim. Great.
If I have one orange tree in my backyard, Can I have shikha on that tree? I don't know if we learned this.
Didn't learn it.
The distinction, like, it's very distinct. Can I have one tree?
I'll tell you why you can't.
It'll be like rotation.
I'll tell you why you can't. Because shikha only begins when you begin to harvest. For you to forget.
Yes, I've done a harvest, you want to.
Rosh
I
Hashuras.
waited for lunch. That's the other half, let's say.
So then,
But,
so the
am I gonna go get it?
no, you won't. No, you won't. No, you won't. That's what we just said. That even if a zay is shafchayni, no toifa, once you began and you forgot the remaining, it is subject to shikha. We're learning like the Rambam. It's only
That kind of people, like, this is kind of-
no. That will be what the Mishnah says, and we'll learn tomorrow that even something distinctive. Once you begin to harvest it, if you forget the remainder, it's shikha. Okay, now let's go. Let's go.
If you put ribbon on all different trees, and then you won't forget any, what happens then?
I would maybe a ribbon is like a location. It's a reminder. Okay. Now, shavchayni, here's the problem. Shavchayni means that it's noitiv shemen. We learned this in the Pnei Moshe, right? There's so much oil. Says the Gemara can be. You know, we don't want, even though the Mishnah opened up with an example of Zayis Notoif. Then the Mishnah says Shmoi, right, Maisov and Mekaymoy. And then the Mishnah explaining the Shmoi says Shavchayni by Shoini. So if you're going to say it means Noitiv Shemen, the Gemara is saying, so then you're repeating Notoifa. So at least call it Notoifa. At least call it the same way. Why are you calling it Shavchani? So therefore, Ella, Shioisa Shemen Harbe. That no, Notoifa means the picture that Kevan showed that certain olives drip oil on their own. That's the beginning. Here the Mishnah is saying, even if it doesn't drip oil of its own, but when you press them, what's special about this tree is that the same number of olives produce more oil. That's the meaning of Shavchan. So the Gemara can't be, because then if you go weiter, Maisov. What's Maisov? That Shuhu Oisa Harbe. So it's the same thing. Ella must be Shavchayni Shuhu Oisa Shemen Harbe. We're going to hold our grounds. Holding grounds means, Lotoifa means it drips on its own. Shavchani means that you don't have a large amount of olives. You don't have. But these few olives, they have a lot of quality. They have a lot of oil in it. Notoifa, noitiv shemen. Maisov means quantity of olives. Maisav shuoisa harbe. And kamos and echos are two distinct things. And let me just chazer aran, at least there's so many discussions throughout that we learned Talmud Babli regarding this topic of how kamos b'chlal echos for a yid. The Torah says ke'atam hama'at mikol ha'amim. So we go with quality. However, in halacha there is a concept of a lot of kamos that's machriya echos. The Rebbe very much celebrated this idea. One of the sources of this is Aran at the end of Masechta Shabbos, and B'Hashgacha Pratis, we are learning now Rambam Hilchas Shabbos, who asks the following question. We learned, I think it wasn't even on the first day. When did we learn Pikuach Nefesh Doiches Shabbos? For the second payday. So here is in the Rambam. He has a simple question. A person is a chayil. Sheyesh boy sakana. This guy needs to eat meat for him to live, enough to justify. And there are two options. You have treifa meat that's available, or you have a living cow that you can shech for him to eat. Guys, don't forget that eating treif, which is takalav, a terrible thing, but it's a lav. Eat this, you get malchus, but there's no kares, there's no skila. And if shechting on Shabbos is a chiyuv skila. So the Ran says that you should shech the animal and give it to the chayil. So he says, why should you do that? The chayil, if you have to violate the lesser one. So he says, because and the chanami, if you shech the animal one time, the echos of the sin is terrible. You have to shech. But it's a one-time act, one sin. If this chayil is going to eat the treifa, every time he takes a bite, whether it's a kazayas, he's doing many, many lavan of eating treif. And ribri kamos is worse than echos. You have another example that he brings from a Masechta Zajac when we learned about the korbanos, and you have different korbanos. Which one should the kohen bring first? So the question the Gemara was speaking about when you have shlamim, remember that, and a bechar. The Gemara is having that discussion. Gemara says you bring a shlamim first. Why? Because a shlamim has so many things that a bechar doesn't have. A matan dalat two that are four, bechar only has one. Remember that Shlomim has a smicha, Bechor doesn't have smicha. Shlomim has tenufa, Bechor doesn't have tenufa. The Gemara gives a whole, but then the Gemara says, hold on, the Bechor is Kodesh Merecha, it's holy. Nevertheless, you bring the Shlomim first. It's another day that Dibur Kamus, Kedusha Merechem is quality of Kedusha. At least over here, it's not which one is greater than the other, but the fact that Gemara is struggling. Why are we giving it into different categories? Here we see it's different categories. In other words, Maisav Shuoisa Harba means Kamus, there's many olives. Shavchani means it's not many olives, but the olives are quality olives. Let's go back. By Shani, two options. One the opposite of the other. One is by the Meimar, by Shani Mamish. By Shani means the opposite. It's not distinctive good, it's distinctive bad. Now, distinctive bad is also something that you won't forget. What's distinctive bad? That Shemzaf, in other words, that it's such a dried out tree that the tree is ashamed with itself. It's producing nothing. Or the way we learned when we learned the Mishnah is it embarrasses its fellow because it's so much greater than its fellow. Now, what does it mean so much greater? Now, we had before in Perek Vav in the last chapter, if you remember again, Machlokes B'Shamai and B'Silo, what happens if you have bundles? Let's say every bundle has the quantity of a kav, and then there was one bundle, Danny, you mentioned that 4 kavim. 4 kavim. And you forgot that. Beishamai says it's not shikha. Beisilo says it is shikha. By the way, we learned that Rambam says in that Beisilo that 4 is the limit. Even Beisilo will be moed if it's more than 4, it's also not shikha. So when we say over here that, wow, there's so much, what does so much mean? Does it have to mean 4 times the amount? Is it only if it produces 4 times as much? Why are we jumping to the number 4 times as much? Like we learned above, that if and one of them was from war kavim, and then Beishamai says it's not shikha. Okay, and what's the issue? The issue would be that is our Mishnah Beishamai, or how can our Mishnah follow Beishamai? Or what's the other option? By an olive tree, everyone will be moida that if it has a lot more, it's going to be distinct enough, and therefore we don't need for it to be even leBeishamai 4 times the amount. And that's what the Gemara says. That if it makes more, not 4 times the amount, then it makes it distinctive enough. And this is about quality, that the quality of oil is such that if it makes more, even if it's not 4 times the amount, the Gemara does not say how much more, and you can say it's subjective. That was what Rabbi Yirmiyah said before, the first statement of Rabbi Yirmiyah, that if for you oil is, it makes everyone gives you 100 liters, it gives you 200 liters. Could be double. Could be for some person, it has to be triple. Could be for some person, it can be 20% more. It's subjective to the owner. As long as it is distinctive enough that the owner knows that if I will skip over this tree, I'm going to remember I skipped over this tree. Then it's included in the din of the Mishnah that it's not subject to shikha. It's getting late. Next, now another question of the Gemara: does it have to be producing this extraordinary amount for the owner every single year? The Gemara says no. Doesn't have to be that way. As long as the majority of the years it has this distinctive quality, even if when you forgot the tree, it was not a year that the tree was producing a special amount, nevertheless, that's the nature of a person. Special doesn't have to be special every single time. Beautiful. Mekoimai, says the Mishnah, for example, that it's standing near a gas, it's standing near a pirza. Now here, clearly, the Gemara is pointing out, like this is mamash just now with Daf Memtes. That was machlekes Beishamai and Beisimel by grain. Masnisa the Beishamai were the ones that said. I know the Mishnah, the Gemara begins to quote the Hefker Aniyim Hefker. That was the first machlekes in the Mishnah. The second machlekes in the Mishnah was this topic: if the sheaf was forgotten near a landmark or next to something unique. And mamash with the same examples. And Beisilol holds that just because the omer that you forgot was near something unique, it does not exclude it from the dinim of shikha. So is our Mishnah only following Beishamai? So answers the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yosi, the Amoida, Divrei Hakolhi, and we had this quoted above, over there in Perek Vav, since we're speaking about the forgetting of an oimer is something that's already detached, even though it was forgotten next to something attached, a pirza, a gas. That's why Beis Hillel says it's not enough for you to remember it. But since over here we're speaking about an entire tree, which to begin with is not something that you forget so easy. And by the way, this will also answer why don't we need the 4-kav ratio? Because anything that's mechuber, we're learning about, you forgot the whole tree. Something that's mechuber is already something that you will probably remember. But amacha, if it's distinctive. But amacha, since davar mechuber, it's davar mechuber, therefore, even Beis Hillel will be moida that it's excluded from the din of shikha. And finally, when Rabbi Yossi Yomer ein shikha l'zeisim, so we already learned before at the end of Amud Aleph that there some understand, and we're going to give the credit to Rabbi Shimon ben Yaakov, that Rabbi Yossi is not arguing the way it sounds like he's arguing. He's saying that there is no shikha by zeisim. He doesn't mean that. That Rabbi Yossi ela barashayna in the earlier years. The earlier years means after Churban Beitar, because he subscribes to the rule of the Mishnah. There is shikha by zeisim. Number one. Number two, if zeisim are distinctive, it's excluded. During a certain period of time, all of the olives trees in Eretz Yisrael were distinctive. There were very few olive trees. Aval Achshav, says Rabbi Shimon ben Yaakov, Achshav, whenever the Achshav began, since now zeisim are back common in the Holy Land, therefore yesh lam shikha, unless it's distinctive. However, not everyone agrees with Rabbi Shimon ben Yaakov. And here, let me say by heart, Nachamal, the psukim that we just quoted. So the Mishnah, Mamash Chitas. So in Parshas Kiseitze, the pasuk says that kisach boit zeisacha, when you harvest your olive tree, sach means you beat it. The way you harvest an olive tree is you beat it for the olives to pour. Lo yisafayir acharecha. Don't remove its beauty from behind you. We already said lo yisafayir means peya. Acharecha, Rashi says, it means shikha. Actually, Rashi, for a child, is saying acharecha means shikha, but it's not direct shikha. The next pasuk in Parshas Kiseitze, the next verse, is speaking about a person harvesting a vineyard. The Torah's expression for harvesting a vineyard is kisiftzor. In the Torah, harvesting every product has another name. Kisiftzor kadmacha. Says the Torah, loisa oila lacharecha, don't go back to take or don't remove the underdeveloped clusters. The problem with that verse is that we have exactly the same pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim, which makes that entire pasuk superfluous. So Chazal learned that even though the Torah is saying don't remove the oila, since we already know that you can't take off the underdeveloped clusters, that pasuk is really hinting to shikha by Keren. Then we have a Gzeira Shava. What's the Gzeira Shava? Acharecha, acharecha. Since the Kadmacha acharecha is referring to shikha, that is what enlightens us to interpret the word acharecha by zeisecha shikha. But for that you have to have a Gzeira Shava. And there's a rule that ein adam don Gzeira Shava. You can't make up your own Gzeira Shava. You have to have a Masleira tradition from your Rebbe that you make it acharecha, acharecha. Rabbi Yossi never had that acharecha, acharecha. So therefore he teaches Kisachboit Zeisecha Loisefayed Acharecha means leaf peya. The pasuk is only talking about peya. There is no shikha by trees. Rabbi Yossi, now obviously Rabbi Yossi is Damoyed. Rabbi Yossi Bar Zavta is interpreting the Mishnah that Loichiev Adam Shikha Lazeisim. It's only Rabbi Akiva, which is the Chacham of our Mishnah, that has the drasha of Acharecha, Acharecha, like we just said. Ma'atam Oy Bazoi was if Acharecha per se doesn't mean shikha. The acharecha means loisafayid acharecha means peya. Elama, Rabbi Akiva had acharecha acharecha. So if you don't have that, if you never heard from your teacher acharecha acharecha, ain't shikha l'zeisam Rabbi Yossi because the l'sharash acharecha at all. So Rabbi Yossi Bar Zavda understands that in our Mishnah there's a machlokes amoira, there's a machlokes tanaim whether there's bachlal shikha by trees. Now the Chachamim hold that there is, just to make it clear, according to the Rambam, Zeisecha will be the ground zero for all the other trees. It's not only Zeisecha or only Karmacha. Loisa oil acharecha and Parshas Kiseitze doesn't mean Loisa oil. It means Loisa oil Kipshuta is on Parshas Kedoshim. means shikha. So by kedem there is shikha, according to everyone. But is it only kedem, or do you go from kedem acharecha to zeisem? And once you do that, we're going to learn you go to all the other trees. To be continued.